These are three free agents that the Blue Jays need to target in the offseason to address some of their issues that they had that were glaring this season. So I'll break down those options and much more on this episode of Jays Digest. Welcome in, everybody, to Jays Digest. I'm your host, Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse. And Nick, the offseason work gets started early for the Toronto Blue Jays, as we all expected here. Playoff baseball is officially getting underway today, I guess we could say. The ALDS kicks off in about 10 minutes at the time of recording with the Detroit Tigers, a team that was in a very similar spot to the Toronto Blue Jays, who squeaked into the playoffs with 86 wins, right? So it just shows you that it was a weak year for the American League in general. The league just didn't perform up to its standard, or at least what we expected. And it was a prime opportunity for the Blue Jays to maybe win a couple of playoff games and go further than they had in years past. But it ultimately didn't come to fruition. And now they're in a position where they need to address some major issues come off-season time. And their off-season, it's getting started right now. Even though there's still baseball being played, the Blue Jays are not playing. So they got a lot of time to mull over these decisions and to decide what's best for the team going forward. We know who's going to be back next year, and that's Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro. So they got to start working the phones early here. And these are three guys that could definitely be big time guys going forward for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, the Jays have a ton of work to do. And like you mentioned, it's going to start now. They're obviously making phone calls, not necessarily for free agents yet, but I'm sure they're doing some due diligence. They're figuring out their plan for the offseason. It starts with the bullpen, Peter. And there's a lot of things in this article dropped basically revealing some targets the Jays need to go after. And I'm curious to see what all your opinions are, both yours and those in the comments as well. See here, 3 free agent targets the Jays should target this winter. And let's start with Tanner Scott. If a big overhaul is needed, why not go for fishing for the biggest fish in the pond? Left-hander Tanner Scott is slated to be one of the top free agent relievers in the open market. And he's unreal. He hasn't looked back since he kind of had that breakout year. He's posted a 1.9 ERA through 142 games over the past 2 campaigns. He's a lefty. Since Tim Mayza kind of fell off last year, the Jays desperately need some additional lefty in the bullpen. Obviously, they have Genesis Cabrera in theory. What are your thoughts on Tanner Scott? He's a very interesting guy and one I'd be very intrigued to see here.
Well, he's actually on my pick to win the World Series, which is the San Diego Padres here. And this guy, I mean, he's jacked, first of all, so truly insane the physique that he's got on him there. But he is a lefty that throws close to 100 miles an hour. And he has been so good ever since coming over to San Diego. He's going to be crucial in their series now against Shohei Ohtani and the Los Angeles Dodgers with all those big time lefties in the lineup. But yeah, he's solid, man, and he's a strikeout guy. And he would probably be the closer on the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't know if they would push Jordan Romano out of that role, but if they were to go out there and get Tanner Scott, I think he would be by far and away the best reliever on the squad, especially considering the way that he's pitched in the last few years, the stuff that he possesses, and he's going to gain some big time experience this year, hopefully playing deep into the playoffs with the San Diego Padres. And the Jays don't really do this though. They don't really go out and spend money on relievers. They maybe go take a flyer out on a guy for 1 year, or they make a trade like they did for Eric Swanson for an expiring deal in exchange for 3, 4 years of a reliever. They tend to not spend big money on relievers, which is why I'm not exactly holding my breath for this to happen, but if they do, go ahead. I mean, look at those. Look at those numbers right there. There's no doubt that he's got some of the most electric stuff out of the bullpen in baseball, and he would be a very welcomed addition to the Blue Jays. I just don't know if that's necessarily up their alley to go out and spend 4 or 5 years of financial commitment on a bullpen arm.
Yeah, they definitely haven't in the past, but their bullpen is also the worst it's been in a while, and they're going to need to do something. And you mentioned the World Series thing. He's an unreal pitcher. Like, you look at the ERA from this year, you look at the ERA from last year, even the year before in a really down year for him, 67 games, 4.3 run ERA. It's not great, but he's been one of the more consistent, if not the most consistent reliever, alongside Emmanuel Clase and a couple other guys in the MLB. I mean, back-to-back 70-plus game seasons. I mean, give me Tanner Scott. I would love it. Though it doesn't strike me as a Ross Atkins type move to sign a reliever with. I mean, you could say relievers are always highly volatile, but he's probably one of the more consistent ones, and he's only 30 years old. So let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on that. But another one now is Carlos Estevez. And after 6 seasons in the Mile High City, right-hander Carlos Estevez took his talents to LA. And this is interesting. So this year, he had pretty good success. With between the Angels and Phillies, he put up a 2.38 ERA across 52 outings and has 26 saves with a very good whip and, of course, walk ratio. And you look at some of the stats here, 2.45 ERA in the season before, 3.9, season before, 3.47. This guy might be a bit more up Ross Atkins' alley. Still going to cost some money, but another consistent reliever who can give you reliable, solid shutdown innings out of the pen and has some okay peripherals, some not great, some better than others. But I mean, his ERA is good. He's looking really solid. And I don't know. I think this would be a pretty good fit for the Jays on maybe a 2 or 3 year deal. They need somebody like spending on relievers is always not ideal, but they need to make some additions via free agency, even though it's not the most efficient route depending on how volatile these guys end up being.
Yeah, Tanner Scott is more of a surefire bet in terms of who you would rather give a long-term contract to, but Estevez is sort of in the same boat as Scott, where he spent the majority of his career on poor teams and not really getting that playoff experience, but now he's on the Phillies, a team that is expected to go on a deep run, and he's pitching in high leverage situations for them. So just that in itself, I think, adds value to the player that you would be getting as opposed to him just being a Los Angeles Angel and then starting to pitch meaningful ball games once you sign him to your team and you don't know how he's going to react to that. So it's going to be a good litmus test to both of these guys, how they react to high pressure environments and not much more high pressure than either San Diego or Philadelphia in the playoffs. So that's what I'm going to be looking at closely here. And yeah, this is another guy who has closing experience who would definitely challenge for Jordan Romano's job as well because he's a pretty solid arm and durable as well. Like you could see that he's gotten in a lot of games in the past few years, and Romano spent the majority of this season on the injured list. So maybe that prompts the Blue Jays to do something that they don't usually do and go out and give money to a reliever over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 years, for example.
Yeah, and ultimately, either of these guys would be welcomed greatly to Toronto if they decide to spend. And we know they are going to spend. It's just a matter of what kind of end of the spectrum they're on, whether it's the high end reliever, the middling reliever, and then the last guy here that we can discuss is going to be Paul Sewald. So he was a part of the article as well. And this guy's super interesting because he's a familiar name. He spent time with the Mariners, struggled a little bit in the 2022 postseason with the Jays, even though they ended up getting the last laugh. But Paul Sewald is an interesting guy. Now, last year he pitched 42 games, 4.31 ERA. He battled injuries a little bit, but he was a very good reliever, even in 2023 for the Diamondbacks here. What are your thoughts on a Paul Sewald to the Jays, signing? The interesting part is here. I don't think he would cost a ton given his injury history and his age. He's now 34 years old. Struggled especially last year with injuries. But I mean, if they can get him at a decent deal, I wouldn't mind a guy like him. Even though I greatly prefer some of the other guys. I have a weird feeling that Paul might be due for a regression here soon. He throws a 91-mile-per-hour fastball. So
Yeah, this feels like a Ross Atkins type of move right here. And if you were to ask me who I would want out of the three, it would be Tanner Scott. But if you were to ask me who I think they would get out of the three, it's unfortunately Paul Sewald. And nothing wrong with Paul Sewald, but like you said, the stuff doesn't really jump out at you like Estevez or Scott's does. So it would be he wouldn't be the closer on the Blue Jays. That I think is pretty safe to say. But another guy with big game experience here. He pitched deep into the playoffs last year with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Obviously, they made the World Series. That's been well documented. And then in the year before that with the Seattle Mariners, he was on that roster that, we don't need to talk about that, but we all know what happened between the Mariners and the Blue Jays in the wild card series. So he's got big game experience. He's a veteran guy, and that strikes me more as a move that the Blue Jays would go out there for because it would figure to be a 1 year deal. You would assume that that would be the case, and I think that's more digestible. And he's still a solid reliever. Still had solid numbers this season in terms of whip and strikeouts, according to his innings pitched, but definitely took a step back ERA wise and stuff wise as well as you could see in his baseball savant numbers here.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with these guys going forward. And the Jays need to make some moves to their bullpen. And let us know in the comments down below which of these three relievers you want to see the Jays target this winter, because no matter who they get, they're going to need to get somebody, and they're probably going to get a couple of guys, though I'm not exactly hopeful that Ross Atkins is going to be able to pull off a guy like Tanner Scott. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are. We'll see you guys tomorrow, and enjoy the playoff baseball if you're watching it today.